I am Director of Undergraduate Education at Queen's Management School. And what I'm going to do tonight is basically just give some insight into the different courses that we offer here. If you have any questions at any time, please do use this little conversation facility. So if you look in the middle of your screen, you should see there's a little bar and you'll see that there's 3 little dots. Beside that then, you should be able to see show conversation. If you click on that, then you'll see some people are actually maybe going to join the meeting, and then others will be leaving messages. So if you yourself do have any questions or anything, please do just add your message there and we'll try to respond to it. So what we're going to do, as I say, is basically just talk through what we do at Queen's Management School. And the first thing to know or to sort of be really aware of is that we are consistently ranked as one of the top universities throughout the UK and indeed the entire world. So if you look at various league tables put together by, say, the Times, you can see that, for example, for accountancy and finance, we are consistently ranked in the top 10 in the UK. So if you think about all those different top universities throughout England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, the degrees that we have here in Queen's Management School consistently rank right amongst the very best. If we go even further afield, so if we look at the rankings in terms of management and economics right across the world, we're actually in the top 200. So think about all those different colleges in America, throughout Europe, throughout Asia. Queen's Management School consistently gets ranked up at the very, very top. And that should hopefully give you confidence that if you do come and join us, you're going to get a very, very good experience. So we offer several different degrees as part of the Management School. What I'm going to do is basically just go through each one in turn. If you have an offer for that particular subject, if you have any particular questions, please do specifically ask as part of that subject, or if you have more general questions, you can also put them in towards the end as well. So the first subject that we offer is called Actuarial Science. And Actuarial Science is basically a really specific field. So actuaries essentially estimate the probability of things going wrong. So what risk do people face in various ways? Now that could be in terms of things like maybe what's the chance of someone is going to crash their car? What's the probability that someone's house might burn down? Or indeed, what's the chance that someone might actually pass away at some particular age? Now, that seems maybe quite specific and in some ways quite odd, but what this will actually allow insurance companies and pension companies to do is to estimate, well, how can we then build products which will help people to avoid those risks? So let's say you have an insurance company, they actually want to sell policies to maybe protect people against the really bad effects of crashing their car. So what they can do is look at the data that has been put together by actuaries. They assess, well, there's maybe a 2% chance that this particular person will crash their car. And actually from that, they can then build up some products which tells you, well, you could maybe sell this insurance product for possibly £300 per year, for instance. That will actually help customers, and it then allows the insurance company to also make some profit. Now, by its nature, actuarial science really requires lots of data. It looks at what has happened in the past and then tries to estimate, well, what might happen next. So by its nature, it does involve quite a lot of maths. It involves a lot of skills in terms of actually taking information and trying to understand what to do with it. So if you are very good at maths, if you want to apply it, then actuarial science could be a very, very good course for you. So what we have then is a really good range of different modules which should teach you lots of different principles of this. So we try and understand, well, how do you put together various models? So what does it look like to actually take data, put together some method to say, well, what is the probability of something happening. And you can go into more detail then, and you can particularly apply it to things like insurance. So as I say, it could be things like car insurance, it could be pet insurance, or indeed home insurance. And what we're doing is trying to follow different statistical techniques which will allow us to actually analyse how those products would work and how companies could actually maybe sell them to customers. Now, a really key part of it then is that you have to be able to collect data. So what we do is we also give you a module in terms of Microsoft Excel and in terms of a tool called Visual Basic for Applications. So that will then teach you the skills around trying to import data, trying to analyze it, and trying to apply it. We also then do things in terms of financial risk modeling. So that is more in terms of trying to understand things like maybe risks within financial markets. So different companies can be exposed to those, and how do we actually assess what might happen in terms of maybe various issues arising within the markets. We also have things like stochastic processes for finance. So this is trying to understand very complex movements in terms of markets. So how do we assess, well, what might happen to stock markets next? And based on maybe some types of random error, can we actually assess the risk of things changing? We also look at capital markets. So this is from the point of view of trying to understand, well, how do stock markets actually fluctuate? So how do you put together models in terms of valuation and in terms of trying to predict what might come next? And we also do other modules in terms of things like financial engineering, which is more in terms of quite advanced products, which you can again use to maybe protect yourself from risk. So you might want to speculate in terms of things like oil prices or things like gold. So how do you assess what might happen to those? Now, one of the really big selling points of the Actuarial Science degree is that you can actually gain lots of exemptions from the professional exams of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. So normally what would happen after students graduate from most degrees, they would be asked to complete quite a number of exams after that whilst they actually work before they become fully qualified. For students who come through the Actuarial Science degree at Queen's, you get lots and lots of exemptions from those. So it gives you this really major head start in the job market. You can skip several of those professional exams and you can become qualified much more quickly. Now, one aspect of that, it is very much subject to academic performance. So you have to perform well during your studies here at Queen's before you can be qualified in terms of those exemptions. Okay, so before I move on to the next little topic here, does anyone have any particular questions about maybe actuarial science or anything that you would like to know more about? If you just want to use that little conversation piece, we can try and answer those. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be too much at the moment. So what we'll do is we'll just move then on to finance. So finance is basically about trying to understand the idea about trying to invest. So it's essentially about making and managing money. Now, a very simple aspect of that might be you take some money and you put it into some sort of bank account. What the bank will then do is they will pay you interest and you can hopefully make some more money on top of your initial capital. What we tend to focus on more in the finance course at Queen's is about investing through things like the stock market. So how do you try to look at the stock market, assess various risks and decide what companies you want to invest in? And how do you go through a process of saying, well, maybe Facebook is worth $200 per share, maybe Apple is worth $500 per share. And from that, can we really put together some sense of what companies are going to go up in price? How do we make some money from that? And can we actually profit from our investments? We also look at various other types of financial markets. So this could be terms of things like maybe currencies. So you've got the pound, the euro, the dollar. They all move against each other all the time. Why does that happen? How do we maybe protect ourselves from some of those changes? We have things called derivatives. So this is maybe where you're going to speculate in things like commodities. That could be something like maybe oil, it could be gold, it could be silver. And what we're trying to do is maybe understand, well, how do you lock in prices on those different commodities and actually sort of be assured that you're going to get a certain deal. We also look at aspects in terms of banks. So let's say that you are maybe managing a bank. How would you decide what companies to lend money to? How would you decide what rate of interest to actually charge them? And from that, then how do you as a bank actually make some money? Now, the very good thing about finance is there's an actual sector of the economy called the financial sector. So if you come and study the finance degree at Queen's, you should be very, very well prepared to go into jobs in that field. Within that, there's lots of different sub-disciplines. So there can be things like investment banking. Now, these tend to be possibly the most actual sought after jobs. They tend to be in major centres like maybe London, New York, or Hong Kong. And what you're doing here is you're dealing with really large multinational companies and you're advising them on major issues. So maybe whenever Twitter wanted to get listed on the stock market, it went through an investment bank. Or maybe if Tesco wants to buy over some other company, it will go through an investment bank to do that. Fund management is about trying to basically take money from your clients and invest it on their behalf. So some people might not know much about investing, and what they will do is they will give it over to people who have much more experience, and you will then say, take £10 million, you'll put it into one particular company in America, you'll take £20 million and put it into some other company in Germany, and maybe another 50 million and put it into somewhere in China. And what you're trying to do is to get the best possible return for your clients, whilst also trying to minimize risk. Another sort of a big aspect of finance then is along this idea about trying to manage risk. So how do we assess what might go wrong, specifically in terms of financial markets? So over the past several weeks, you can see that there has been some declines in terms of stock prices. So how do companies actually protect themselves from that? How do they actually use that information then maybe to move forward and actually hopefully buy at prices which are quite cheap and hopefully will then make some money longer term? Financial operations is more about the day-to-day background. So it could be in terms of buy and sell orders. It could be to do with things like how maybe buy and sell orders are actually connected. We also have retail banking. So this is more the idea of the high street banks. So how do you essentially go through this process of assessing different risks, maybe from maybe small companies, from actual individuals, and from that try to assess what you should actually do in terms of lending money. And then some of our finance students will actually then go into a career in terms of accountancy. Some people actually ask, well, what's maybe the difference between accountancy and finance? Well, I'll talk about accountancy in some more detail in a moment, but it's essentially more about reporting company performance. So it's about trying to assess how companies have done. Have they made profits? How much debt do they actually have? Whereas finance is about trying to take that information and use it for investment purposes. So the fields are distinct, but because they are also connected in some ways, it is very much possible for some finance students to then move over and become accountants as well. In terms of modules, so again, we have various modules trying to get you to grips with all the different aspects of how stock markets work and various other financial institutions. So we have modules in terms of trying to give you the very basics of those. We also then have a module in terms of Maths for Finance. Now, this is essentially trying to get you to understand all the different equations, all the different techniques that are needed to value different companies. Maths is also a very important part of almost everything we do in finance, so it's important to have really good skills in that. Investment analysis then is about trying to understand, well, how do we assess what might happen in the stock market? What types of companies tend to perform better? How can we actually maybe manage our portfolios to get the best possible returns? Monetary theory is more about how we actually understand money. So why do we put so much faith in essentially pieces of paper? How is that connected into things like the Bank of England or the European Central Bank? We also then have international finance. So this is in terms of this idea about different currencies. You have the dollar, the euro, and the pound, and trying to understand those fluctuations. Financial engineering is about this idea of futures and options. So it's about trying to speculate on different assets, and from that then trying to understand price movements over time. And then we have corporate finance. So this is from the perspective of you actually maybe managing some companies. So let's say you're the chief financial officer in a large firm. How do you make informed financial decisions? So that could be around things in terms of maybe whether you actually get listed on the stock market, whether you merge with other companies, how much you pay out to shareholders in terms of dividends. Okay, so again, if there's any questions in terms of finance, just type them in there. And what I'll try and do is maybe just run back over a couple of the queries that we had in terms of actuarial science as well. So there's a query about is there any reading that can be provided over the summer? So what you can do is basically contact the program director, who is called Neil McConville, and we can provide you some contact details soon. And he should be able to give you some advice about some first-year modules and how you might want to prepare for those. In terms of the ratio between girls and boys who study actuarial science, so it is probably essentially 50-50. There's maybe slightly more boys on the course, but it's not really too much different. In terms of then how many years it might take you to be qualified after you graduate, it really depends on sort of how quickly you can actually move through those professional exams. Typically, it would probably take another 5 years after you've actually come through university, but that will depend on how many exemptions you have. It will then depend on on how many exams you will then take each year after you're actually qualified, and actually whilst you're working at the same time. Okay, excuse me. I'll just try and pick up then anything else here. So in terms of the placement year, yes, absolutely, there is indeed a placement year with actuarial science. We'll cover some more details about placement years just at the very end, but placements are a really, really key aspect of this. What this will allow you to do to go a big firm, really get very, very good practical experience, and that is actually exactly the same with the finance degree. So if you're studying finance, you will also go out, you'll get really, really good practical experience working for a big investment firm, and from that then it should give you a really, really good head start trying to get into a well-paid graduate job. Okay, so again, if you have any more questions just about either actuarial science or finance, please do feel free just to add some more questions there along the side. Okay, so what we'll do is then just move on to economics. So economics you can think of as basically being split into two major parts. So the first part is what we might call macroeconomics, and this is really how economies function. So if you think about maybe unemployment, inflation, economic growth, what we're trying to do is understand, well, what actually changes that within different countries, and how do we understand or predict what might happen next. But the other big part of economics then is microeconomics, and this is more about how individuals make decisions. So each person is faced with different constraints. We only have a certain amount of time or a certain amount of money. So given that, how do we make informed decisions? How do we choose the best possible outcomes? that can then make us as well off as possible. Now, basically, economists require skills in terms of both qualitative and quantitative techniques. So you need to be informed about different theories, about how things work, but you also need to be able to take data and to analyze it. And it's actually trying to give you skills in both of those areas that will give you the tools that you need to succeed in future. Now, one really good feature about the degrees in economics is you can combine them with different subjects. So, for example, you can do a degree called Economics with Finance. So that's essentially 2/3 economics modules and then 1/3 in terms of finance. You can do Economics and Accounting, which is more 50% economics, 50% accounting. Business economics will be 50% economics and 50% business management. You can also combine it with French or Spanish, or you can also do a degree which is called Politics, Philosophy and Economics. And this will then basically give you a very wide overview of lots of different issues. In terms of modules within economics, so again, we try and build you up in terms of understanding this whole area about what is the economy, how does it function, what are all the different aspects to it. So it could be things like consumption, investment, exports, and how does the government actually play a role in there as well. Building on that, then you move in to specialize in both of those areas that I mentioned. So in terms of macroeconomics, so that's that big picture idea. How does maybe changes within economic growth feed through into maybe the financial sector, into the market for labour, into wages, and how that does that actually make people better off. We have microeconomics, which is the other side, which is more in terms of trying to understand the process by which people assess their utility. So how do we assess what's going to make us better off? How do we make really informed decisions that will hopefully give us the best possible outcome? And using those techniques, then we can try to focus into very specialized areas. So it could be in terms of labour economics. So what's the role of maybe trade unions? What is the impact of government schemes to actually get people into work? Maybe how is there actual differences between different groups within the labour market? We also do a module in terms of economic history. So how do we understand how economies have changed over the very long term? What has been the impact of things like the Industrial Revolution? How has what has actually changed due to technology? And what might or what can we actually learn then from what has happened in the past? In terms of public economics, so this is more from the side about what is the role of government. So do we go for a situation where governments are very, very involved in the economy, which is the case in maybe some countries like, say, China, or do we go for an approach which is much more hands-off, like the situation probably in the UK? And what's that balance? What are the pros and cons of governments actually taking part in the economy? Okay, so any other questions then just about anything that we've talked about in terms of finance, economics, or actuarial science? Okay, so there's a very good question there just about what's the chance that you'll get a job after completing either the finance or actuarial science degrees. So essentially it's almost 100% employment. What we tend to find with our graduates is that they are very, very much sought after. So having that combination of skills that they've actually picked up through this course, but also from that really practical experience in terms of going out on placement, it makes our students really, really sought after. So I think for both degrees, in the past year, it was about 95% employment within 6 months. And the other key statistic there is that all of those jobs were in really good professional managerial jobs. So students are actually using the skills that they've picked up, and it has been really worth their while to come and study these courses. There's a question there just in terms of, is economics with finance better than economics itself in terms of job prospects? Do employers prefer a dual degree? Basically, it depends on what particular field you want to go into, or if you maybe want to keep some flexibility. If you know that you want to work in finance, then it would be natural to choose finance as the single course. If you know that you want to be an economist, it would be natural that you would then choose economics as your single course. If you're not quite sure, if you want to get exposure to both, then you can do economics with finance. You probably don't go into as much depth in either of those subjects as you would do doing each one individually. So there probably is some trade-off there in terms of flexibility, maybe versus how much depth you have. But all of these courses are going to lead on to very, very good opportunities. So basically, no matter what you actually do, hopefully you should get really good outcomes from it. Another question there just about, is the finance and maths with finance the same course? So no, the finance course that we've talked about here is run out of Queen's Management School. So it is focused around those things that we talked about investing, about the stock market. Now, we do ask for students to have completed A-level maths. Maths is a very, very important part of it, but it's not nearly as intense as a maths degree. The other course that you've mentioned there is Maths with Finance. That's basically run out of the Maths department. It is essentially about 2/3 of a sort of typical Maths degree. So you are dealing with quite abstract concepts, with quite abstract theory. And if that's something which you find appealing, that's absolutely great. But for some people who maybe don't want to do a full degree in terms of maths, probably the finance course here might be more appropriate. Okay, so I'll just move on then maybe to accountancy, and again, if you have any other questions, we can pick some of these up later on. Okay, so in terms of accountancy, so accountancy is basically about trying to provide information to decision makers. Now, what that means is we can basically split it down into two parts. You might have what we call financial accounting. And this is where people will actually work in companies, or else they will maybe go into companies and they will put together financial statements to show outsiders how that company has been performing. So you will count up how much this company has sold. You will count up its costs, you'll work out profits. You'll also put together assessments of things like how much does it own in terms of assets, how much does it owe to other people. Now, that information is very, very useful for investors. It's key for anyone who has actually put money into the company to be assured that that company is performing well and that it is actually reporting accurate figures. The other big side of it then in terms of accounting is what we might call management accounting. Now, this is much more for internal purposes. So for managers to actually make really informed decisions, what they have to do is have accurate information about company performance. So management accountants will put together very detailed insights about how different parts of the company is actually performing. And from that, hopefully, you can try to find ways to maybe cut costs or to improve performance. That will also be really, really key then in terms of trying to put together budgets. So trying to assess what different departments should get the investment next year, which ones should maybe expand. Now, One of the really big selling points of the accounting degree here at Queen's is that we have accreditations from lots of different professional bodies. So you can see there, there's lots of different places involved. Each of them will give you exemptions from their professional exams. So in the same way as we talked about for actuarial science, once you actually graduate from any degree, you will be asked then to do some extra exams after you have graduated and whilst you are working. Now, if you have studied the accountancy degree here at Queen's and you've performed well and you've met the criteria in terms of academic performance, then you can actually get exempt from those exams, from some of them, and that will give you that head start above some other students. So there is exemptions available from places like the ACCA, which is the large global organisation for accountants. You've got the Chartered Institutes of Management Accountants, so that's that idea of actually working within companies. You have Chartered Accountants Ireland, which would be the body which actually looks after accountancy in both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And then we have things like, in terms of England and Wales, public finance, and indeed international accountants. So the degree at Queen's is very, very well connected in with all these different professional bodies, and you can get exemptions then based on academic performance. So in terms of the structure of our degree, so it is based around those two big areas. So you have financial accounting. So what will basically happen is in first year you will have introductory financial accounting. You will then build on that in second year to intermediate, and then in final year to advanced financial accounting. Same idea for management accounting. So you'll start off with the basics in first year. You'll become more and more advanced in second year, and then indeed in terms of final year. So those are the really key aspects of accountancy. We want to make sure that you've got, a really, really firm grasp of them, and we make sure that all of those different concepts are very well covered. But we also cover other things, so things like in terms of law. So law plays an important role in various aspects of accountancy. So we need to know, well, what are the really key laws in terms of businesses? What are the various regulations that you then have to meet in terms of putting together financial statements? Taxation is obviously another really, really large area that companies have to face. So they have to put together assessments that will then inform how much corporation tax they pay, but also things like value-added tax. And from that, then we have to actually put together information for the government so that companies can meet those liabilities. We also try to give you really good practical experience. So we have a module called Accounting Information Systems. So this is trying to get you familiar with the various software that is used in professional firms, so that you, once you actually graduate, once you work in those companies, you get very, very, good insights to it already, and you can begin straight away. Now, there is some maths involved in accountancy. It wouldn't be nearly as much as would be in actuarial science or finance, or even in terms of probably economics. But you do have to be very familiar with numbers. So you are going to be using numbers quite a bit in terms of actually putting together these various pieces of information. So we also have a module in terms of quantitative methods. Okay, so I'll just pick up then on a few other queries that have come in. Okay, so a query just in terms of what is the main difference between actuarial science and finance. So finance is basically covers the entire financial sector. So it's about investing, it's about trying to understand things like stock markets, banks, and how that actually then influences things like maybe stock market changes and how people make decisions in terms of their portfolios. Actuarial science is much more specific. It's focused in on those two key areas of insurance and pensions. So it's much narrower. It does look at maybe how things change in financial markets, but its main aim is really to put together models of things going wrong. And from that then insurance companies and pension companies can actually use that information. The finance degree, so it doesn't have professional exemptions from the accountancy actual exams. You may be able to apply for sort of 1 or 2 exemptions, but it doesn't sort of have that as part of it. That is one of the big selling points then of the actual accountancy degree, is that it has those extra exemptions. Now, I suppose the sort of trade-off there is again that finance can lead you into probably a broader range of different jobs. So it can lead into those things like investment banking, fund management, and indeed risk management. And you could maybe move over to accountancy later if you wanted to, but you wouldn't then get those exemptions from that. So again, there's this sort of trade-off between focusing in, if you know you want to be an accountant, go ahead and focus in then on the accountancy degree. If you're not sure about that, if you want to leave some options open, then you can study finance, and you have various different opportunities then that come up from that. Query then, having not studied economics before, do you get taught the foundation? Yes, absolutely. So we basically assume that all students coming into us really don't have any sort of background in terms of things like economics or business. Many schools don't actually offer economics at A level, so we completely understand that. What we will do is we will basically take you through from the very basics of it, and then build you up all the way, so that you're then dealing with very advanced concepts. And there's a question then just about transferring between courses. So once you actually start a course, you can't transfer over sort of straight away to any other course. So let's say you started Actuarial Science. It's not possible to transfer sort of straight away over to finance, maybe say after 6 weeks or maybe halfway through. What you can do is you can withdraw from that current course, and you can then apply to start some other course back in first year. But that would be the following September. So once you're actually sort of part of the school, you can actually submit that transfer request, but it would mean you going back to first year in that other course and basically starting that course again entirely from new. Okay, so again, just keep moving on here, and we can try and pick up some other questions then in a moment. So the other big course then that I'm going to talk about is business management. So business management basically tries to give you a really good insight into lots of different aspects of how would you run a business. So that could be that you're maybe going to start your own business. It could be that you become a manager within an existing business, or it could be that you become a consultant who actually goes in and advises different companies on how to improve performance. So it covers a really wide range of different things. Part of management is actually trying to lead people, so trying to convince them to actually perform well, to say that this is how we get the best out of our staff. There will always be change, so things are actually changing all the time, and indeed that's the case at the moment with everything that's going on. So how do companies actually respond to that? and that then is down to managers to actually deal with that. You can then look longer term at trying to develop strategy. So how do you set the goals of this organization, and how do we then set into motion to actually achieve that? And then how do we actually innovate? How do we get the best out of this company? How do we create new products that are going to be useful for customers? So within business management, then again, we try to cover these different aspects, so that you should be really well prepared, no matter which aspect of business you then want to focus on. So we will start off with modules in things like the history and philosophy of management. So business have only really been around essentially for the last 200 or 300 years. Before that, things were based around maybe small farms, or in terms of maybe government playing some role. But this concept of having companies, of having businesses, has really only emerged over the past 200 years. So from that then, how have businesses changed? How has the concepts of management actually grown? And how then can we actually learn some theories and techniques about management? A really good part of business management is trying to convince people to buy your product. So how do you actually market it? How do you sort of put together products? How do you set certain prices? How do you maybe put together adverts that are going to encourage people to really buy your product, to say this is something that I need, and which is going to be worth paying for. We've then also got human resource management. So this is in terms of trying to maybe bring in new staff. What's the process of trying to attract good quality employees? How do we maybe also then deal with staff while they are here? How do we set pay? How do we deal with lots of various regulations around that? We also then have things in terms of maybe leading for change. So how do we set priorities where we can go ahead and get the best out of people? So what's the technique to actually encourage people? What techniques have been used by politicians, but also by major business leaders to really perform well? There's also lots of ethical issues which come up in business. So how do we trade off between things in terms of what might be good for shareholders, but what's not necessarily good for employees, or which might not be good for customers? So there's lots of issues there that sometimes connects in with issues around law and how then companies can make sure that they don't break any regulations. In final year then, you will get the choice to choose between either a consultancy project or in terms of business startup. So people who might want to go down the route of consultancy would be, you're probably looking to have jobs in some of these large firms like maybe PwC, Ernst & Young, Deloitte. And what you're doing there is you're advising companies on how to perform better. With business startup, it's where you would want to then run your own business. So you maybe have some idea about how to put together some product, and you want to then go through that entire process of developing that, of trying to convince customers to buy it, and then maybe even bringing in employees. So hopefully from that good range of modules then you will get this good opportunity and a really good practical experience. And I should also emphasize basically for all these subjects, I'm basically just picking out some modules for each degree. We cover lots of other things as well. So there's lots of different bits of maybe finance or economics or accountancy, or indeed business management there on top of what I've discussed. And our aim is to give you really good, in-depth insights into all these different subjects, so that no matter which course you choose, you should become really, really expert in it. Okay, so I'll just pick up if we have any other queries here. So for consultancy and business startup, those are actually both done in terms of groups. So this will give you the experience to actually work together to come up with ideas and trying to assess what might be a good idea to maybe put together some sort of business. With business consultancy, what you actually do is you go out as a group, you speak to an existing company, you talk to the managers in that firm, you discuss some problems that they might be having, and from that then try and come up with some solutions. So you're actually speaking to employees and getting really good practical experience from that. Okay, in terms of things like the methods of assessment for actuarial science. Actuarial science would typically be about 75% exam based and about 25% maybe coursework, assignments or presentations. That's fairly typical for some other degrees as well. Finance would be largely 75% exam, maybe slightly lower in some modules. Economics and accountancy would also have similar splits. Business management would probably have slightly fewer exams, so it would be a bit more coursework based. There would be more assignments and you know, a chance to write up reports and to put together various presentations and that sort of thing. Okay, so the other degree then that we offer is called International Business with a Language. And the focus here is basically trying to take this idea about business management, but maybe applying it in a really, really global context. So how do major multinationals work? How do companies operate across different places? So we have specific modules which really focus in on that. So we look at the business environment right across the world. We look at maybe how to manage across different cultures, and also then how do you set a strategy which can cover not only what's happening in your particular region, but how it ties in with what's happening right across the world. But the other really, really key feature of the international business degree is that 1/3 of your modules then are language based. So 2/3 of it is about business management, and then 1/3 of it is where you're actually studying some other language in the language school. Now you can choose various options there in terms of which language it is you actually study. So French and Spanish would probably be our most popular subjects there. If you have studied either of those courses at A level, that then would potentially be a very good way to continue on those language skills whilst also, you know, trying to get really good experience in terms of business. And what you'll actually do is you'll also go out and you will spend 1 year overseas. You will work in, say, France or Spain or elsewhere, trying to combine both business and those language skills. We also offer then some courses in terms of German, Mandarin and Portuguese. Now, student numbers there would probably be quite a bit less, just because maybe they're not very common in terms of actually being studied at school, but they are options then for students as well. But we would say that if you are good at languages, then to, you know, really consider which language you might want to focus on, and probably if it's something that you studied already, then that would be the natural choice for you to continue with. Okay, so that's basically a summary of the different subjects. What I'm going to do now is just pick up then on some general things that we offer basically right across the entire school. And one of the key things that we try to do is to give students really, really good real world practical experience. And the sort of major feature of that is that we have integrated placement years within several of those subjects. So the finance degree, the actuarial science degree, international business with a language, and business management will all have all of our students going out on placement for 1 year. So you study for 2 years, you go out, you work for a firm for 1 year, and then you come back to us in final year. And we think that this is really, really excellent experience for you. So we invest lots of time and money in actually supporting you through that process. So we have a specialised placement office. We have 5 staff there whose entire function it is to help students get a top quality placement job. So they will help you with things like interview skills, with aptitude tests, but they will also connect you in with lots of different employers that take on our students year after year. And the reason that we do this is because it's really, really beneficial for you whenever you go to apply for graduate roles. So you'll be competing against hundreds of different students once you actually graduate. If you can say that you've worked for one of these big firms, it's going to really set you apart. It will actually show that you can demonstrate that you can work hard, that you can perform well, and actually having that experience will often be a really big boost to you in getting good graduate roles. What also tends to happen quite a lot is that our students will then actually go back into graduate roles with the company that they had been with on placement. And this is basically because employers increasingly want to get to know students before they hire them on a full-time basis. So if our students perform well, they will then ask them back into full-time permanent roles. Now, economics and accountancy doesn't have that actual need to go out on placement, but it is still possible. You can take an optional placement. It's not sort of built into your course, and there wouldn't be just as much then support in terms of that placement office, but it is still there for you as an option. We do also very much encourage students on those courses to maybe take some sort of shorter internship. So maybe over the summer, you'll actually go on and work for companies and build up your experience that way. In terms of some companies then that our students actually go out to, so it very much depends on which particular degree that you're studying. But here are just some examples of places that our students will actually go to. So if you're studying maybe Actuarial Science, so you'll go into those large insurance companies like Aviva or Allianz. For things like finance, it might be big investment banks like Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. For accountancy or economics or indeed basically any of our courses, it might be those big professional services firms. So things like Deloitte, KPMG, PwC. It could be more general businesses like Intel or Bombardier. Or as I say, some students then will actually go out to France or Spain and will work for companies based over there, such as maybe Asinium or Cremerius. Another big feature then of what we do to try to get students really good practical experience is we have this trading room. So this gives you access to exactly the same terminals that you have in any of the big investment banks worldwide. So anyone who's trading on the markets in London or New York, they're basically using the exact same equipment as we have here in Queen's Management School. So having that really good practical experience will be very beneficial to you in your career. And it also helps you to apply some of the knowledge that you get in lectures so that you can actually use it in a much more applied way. Now, the trading room is mainly in terms of students who are on the finance degree, but it it is also open to people through things like the Student Managed Fund, which I'll also go on to speak about now. So this is basically this club, which is run by students, and they will have £35,000 of real capital to invest. So our students basically decide how to manage that portfolio. So how much money do they invest in maybe Intel? How much do they put in to Twitter? How much do they put into basically companies that are spread right across the world? So students lead this. They do all the research. They make all the decisions. They put together pitches to try to convince others to actually go along with their ideas. So having that really strong practical experience and being student-led is a huge benefit, and again is something that employers often talk to us about as being a big selling point. Okay, so just to summarize all of those different degrees, so basically if you have offers by now, hopefully you're aware of those different offers, but just to sort of give you this quick overview. So the subjects at the top, so Actuarial Science and Finance, they are both requiring A-level maths. So if you really enjoy maths, if you sort of want to continue it in a way that you can apply it to business, then those could be very good options for you. Economics would have still quite a lot of maths, but A-level maths is not required. Accountancy, again, would have some maths, and business management, probably not very much maths at all. So if you have sort of multiple offers across different degrees, that's maybe something to think about. You know, how good are you with numbers? How much do you enjoy maths? And then that might inform what degree you want to choose. In terms of requirements, so Actuarial Science then is obviously very demanding. It's A star and 2 A's. Most of the rest of our degrees are an A and 2 B's, except accountancy there, which you'll see is 2 A's and a B. So what I'll do is basically I'll try and pick up on some more questions here, but just to say that if there are questions that you don't think about now, but you maybe want to come back to later, please do get in touch with me. So just email me anytime. So it's just gareth.campbell@qub.ac.uk, and you can also visit our website, so qub.ac.uk/MGT. And there's lots of information on there about different courses, and it will also give you some sense about maybe different staff members and also things that we do around research and other practical experience that we offer. Okay, so thank you very much indeed for listening to me. What I'm going to do now is just try and pick up some more questions, and if you have anything else, please do type it in now, and we will try to just go from there. Okay, so let's see now. So there's a question there just about with international business with Spanish, can you complete your placement in any Spanish-speaking country, or is it only in Spain? So technically it is possible to complete it in other areas that speak Spanish. Historically, it has been easiest for our students to go to Spain, just because we have been part of the European Union. There's no issues around visas there, or there haven't been any issues, certainly in the past. So it has been the case then that most of our students have gone to Spain. But technically, if you can find a placement elsewhere and it meets that requirement, then certainly yes, that is possible. Is it possible to add this placement year to a course even though it's not applied for through UCAS? So for as the Actuarial Science, Finance, Business Management and International Business of the Language, all students going through those courses have that placement year integrated into them. Now, for economics and accountancy, if you are a student from the UK, you can optionally go out on placement. If you are an international student, so if you've come from, say, China, given the requirements around visas, it's not currently possible for you to then choose to do an economics with placement option or an accountancy with placement option. So if you do have sort of specific maybe queries around your particular situation, just do email me and I can try to respond to that specifically. There's a query then just about business economics. So business economics, I just touched on very, very briefly as being one of the combinations which are offered within the economics pathway. So business economics is essentially 50% business management and 50% economics. So it tries to cover both of those subject areas that we've gone through. So half of your modules will be about that idea about the economy, about how do economies grow, how do people make decisions in terms of maybe microeconomics. The other half will be about how do you manage businesses. So how do you understand things like maybe marketing, leadership, or how do you maybe start up your own company. Okay, just try and pick up a few other courses. Okay, so as a query then about why are the grades higher for actuarial science? So basically it depends on the number of spaces that we have on each course. So actuarial science is probably our smallest course. We can only have limited numbers of students on that course, just because of actually going out then and getting exemptions from those professional qualifications. So we have to limit the number of students. Given that, we can only accept in students with very, very high grades, which would then lead on to those higher requirements. There's another query just about actuarial science in terms of restricted to working in insurance and pensions. So that would probably be the most natural avenue for you to go down. After you graduate, if you decide you don't want to work in pensions or insurance, that's fine. You can move over to something else. But that would sort of, you probably wouldn't be using your exemptions much. There might be some opportunities maybe within some finance companies for actuaries outside of pensions and insurance. But sort of the most natural aspects of them then would be pensions and insurance. Query then, so will grades be affected if a placement can't be found? Typically, every single one of our students will actually find placements. It's very, very uncommon that students will not. If that is the case, then we will sort of have to have discussions about what that actually means. But essentially, all of our students typically on those courses with integrated placements should basically be going out on placement. Okay, it's a query then just about, so estimated size of a couple of courses. So for business management, you'd be talking probably maybe 120 students on the course. For actuarial science, you'll probably be talking maybe about 40 students. And then other courses would be somewhere in between. So finance would typically have maybe about 90 students per year, accountancy probably about 80, international business, that sort of subgroup, there will probably maybe be about 25 students just who are actually combining business management then with those language skills. Is there a placement year for business economics? Are the big firms open to people with business economics degree? So yeah, absolutely. So business economics, as I say, is that combination between business management and economics. So some companies will sort of want people who maybe focus more on business. Some people will want people who focus more on economics. But business economics, it will give you exposure to both of those. So there is in sort of all of those cases some trade-off just between how much detail you can get. So do you really focus in on one subject, or do you sort of get more flexibility and then open up to some other areas? Okay, so let's just see. Okay, so there's a query then just about how economics with finance is split. So it's basically 2/3 economics and 1/3 finance. So essentially, for all of these courses, you would do 6 modules per year. So for economics with finance, 4 of those would be economics based and 2 of them will be finance based. Query about a placement year for business economics. So that is not actually integrated into the course. What you would have the option to do is to sort of find your own placement. It's not a case that you would sort of actually then have that recognised as part of your degree. It would be sort of up to yourself, just basically going out and trying to get that practical experience. There's a query about, do the Southern universities get more exemptions from actuarial exams, and if so, why? So you will need to check that just with Neil McConville, who's program director, and I think you'll be able to access his particular presentation individually. As far as I'm aware, one of the universities at least does get 1 extra exemption. That I think is due to possibly them having a shorter placement actually as part of their course. So I think some of the universities in Dublin only have 6-month placements, so you don't get as much practical experience of actually working in companies. But they then that would mean that they can probably study that extra module, which might lead on to another exemption. There's another query then, is there any study abroad opportunities if you study actuarial science? Typically, no, there isn't. Almost all of our students would go through basically the standard process of 2 years at Queen's. You would do 1 year where you would typically work in maybe Dublin, Belfast or London, and then you would come in to final year. We are sort of looking at the possibility that you might be able to sort of take an optional extra year where you could sort of do your own study, but that wouldn't be formally recognised as part of your degree. So basically, because we have this need to have exemptions, we can't let students actually sort of skip any of those modules. So students would have to, complete all of our modules. If you did want to take this extra time out as well, then that should be possible. Okay, and let me just see. Okay. So just why isn't there as much emphasis on a placement year for economics? So it's basically just the way the courses have been set up over the years. So basically, as new courses have come along, we have essentially just started them with placements, and just given some economics students then the option to take placement if they want to. So typically, probably about maybe 20% to 30% of economics students each year would actually go out on placement. But we think it's also useful to have that sort of option of degrees and specifically combinations of degrees which don't offer placements, so that you can progress more quickly. So let's say you maybe wanted to do maybe some sort of finance role, but you definitely don't want placement, you could choose the economics with finance degree, and you could go straight through that basically without having to complete that placement year as part of it. A query about whether you can do placements abroad. Yes, again, that should be possible subject to visas. So if you can, basically find some opportunities and you can get that visa arranged for it, that should be possible. Almost all of our students on finance, actuary, business management would actually stay within sort of those main locations of London, Dublin, and Belfast, and it would typically then just be our international business with a language students who would go further afield, just because they obviously have that extra knowledge in terms of various languages. We do also actually offer some languages with economics and with accountancy. So economics with Spanish or economics with French, and also accountancy with Spanish or accountancy with French. Now, on those, you are actually required to go out and spend a year abroad as well. And that could be either studying or on placement. And you can then get that good practical experience. And I think it maybe is necessary to actually work rather than study, or you may be able to do some combination possibly. Okay. Okay, so I think we've probably covered most of the queries. Okay, so just a query then, how many exemptions are included in the Actuarial Science degree, and how many exams are left to complete after graduation? So as far as I'm aware, it would be 6 exemptions under this new system that has recently been introduced. But for that sort of detail, I'll probably pass you on to Neil McConville and his actual knowledge of it, because he could probably give you a bit more information there. Would the split economics degrees be more likely to have placements? Basically, for all of those economics pathways, there are no placements as part of them, except for economics with Spanish or economics with French. So economics with finance, business economics, or economics with accountancy, there are no placements which are actually integrated into them, but there is that option to do them if you want to. Are there any placement opportunities in the US for business management? Again, as long as you can find a job and deal with the visa issues, we are certainly happy then for you to pursue that. But probably the biggest issue there is just in terms of trying to get visas to work in the US. Is there much help and support from teachers in the Actuarial Science course? Yes, absolutely. So basically, right across all of our different degrees, we offer, a really good package of support. So that can be from lecturers themselves. So they would be your sort of most natural point of contact for any issues around what you're studying. So you have lectures, but then you also have tutorials where you're broken down into groups of maybe 15 to 20 students. So that gives you this good opportunity just to speak with lecturers in this smaller group context, and actually then to get to know other people. You also have people called advisors of study. So they are your point of contact if you have any queries about basically any issue. Maybe if you're having some exceptional circumstances, if you're ill, if you have any sort of queries around that, then your advisor of studies can give you advice. We also have something called a personal tutor. So in first year, when you come in, this person then is this extra point of contact. If you have any issues around transition, you can speak to them. We also have what's called peer mentors. So these are probably second year students. So they have gone through this experience, they have actually volunteered to help first years. So again, you can ask them for some advice. As a query about level of computing then in terms of actuarial science. So we try to give you some really good experience in terms of IT skills. So that can be things like Microsoft Excel, and then moving on to programming with things like Visual Basic for applications, and programming in terms of a statistical software called R. And there are some other actuarial specific programs which are also involved there. So yes, just a sort of follow-on question there in terms of programming and coding. So this would mainly be around Visual Basic for applications, and then a statistical language called R, and those would be the languages that are used in practice whenever you go out into work in actuarial firms. So which firms take on business economics graduates? So it's it could be sort of from either the economic side of stuff. So that could be maybe government departments. So within the civil service, they basically will tend to hire some economists each year. It could be in terms of professional services firms. So again, that could be within maybe the consultancy side of stuff. So you're maybe advising governments in terms of public policy, or it could be more in terms of the business consultancy side of stuff, where you're advising companies around different processes, and you're trying to combine this idea of theories and different models to actually then apply it in terms of how businesses can improve. For things like accountancy and economics, same sort of idea. It would be that sort of combination of either those economics careers, or you could then move into some roles in terms of accountancy. And again, those would be within those big firms. Okay, so I think we're probably sort of drawn towards the end. If anyone has any last questions, do feel free just to type those in now. But as I say, if there is any follow-up questions, please just do get in touch with me after this. So my email is gareth.campbell@qub.ac.uk. There will also be various presentations which have been put together by our program directors. So if you've maybe applied for finance, you can listen to that presentation and you can then follow up. If it's actuary, similarly, you can go through that in more detail. And if you have really specific queries, you can then feed those through into the program directors.